Okay. Excellencies, ministers, commissioners, secretaries, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure and is indeed a privilege to moderate the second panel discussion. And first of all, I would like to congratulate my colleague, Permanent Secretary Husu for an excellent job done to facilitate the first panel. And also, I congratulate the previous panelists for an inspirational and insightful discussion during the first hour. So the theme for this panel is the role of water in circular economy and green development. In this panel, we will concentrate on this issue from the political point of view. As we know that we have another panel with the same theme in the afternoon at the Marina Palace from a different point of view, that is from the business point of view. So with that, I would like to introduce and call upon the panelists for this panel discussion. His Excellency, Mr. Gabriele Altana, Italian ambassador to Finland. His Excellency, Mr. Kees Banissa, Dutch ambassador to Finland. Welcome. Mr. Simon Buckle, head of division of OECD. Welcome. Mrs. Joanna Kopczyńska, Deputy Director for the Water Resources Department of the Ministry of the Environment of Poland. And Mr. Péter Kovács, Head of Department, Ministry of the Interior of Hungary. Welcome to the panelists. Thank you. Before I put my questions to the panelists, I would like to share just some quick thoughts on the subject of this panel. In fact, it was touched upon by Commissioner Vella in your speech this morning, in your discussion, in your talk, that the European Commission has adopted an ambitious circular economy package strategy, and to stimulate the Europe's transition towards circular economy that will help the European economy more competitive and that foster sustainable economic growth and also generating new jobs. Water reuse and nutrient cycling are the key elements in this process, in this package. And similarly, China has introduced green development as one of its economic targets. China is working toward environmental protection in a couple of areas, including an expansion of the renewable energy markets, reduction of supply-side pollution, promotion of low-impact development in some regions, and the encouragement of green finance. And as you have heard that in the opening speech of His Excellency Mr. Chinley, the water treatment rate is pretty high in China, and many efforts have been taken to stimulate the green economy. So without much ado, I would like to put my first question to Dutch ambassador, and, Mr. Benissa. Mr. Ambassador, the Netherlands is a country of estuary of major three major rivers originating from the Europe continent. And your country has a very long history of living with water in terms of flood safety, water quality, and eco-restoration. Meanwhile, the Netherlands has a high industrial and agricultural production, and is also the density of population is pretty high. So I would say the impeccable, seemingly impeccable urban delta is indeed facing a lot of dilemmas. So my question to you, Mr. Ambassador, how does the Netherlands adapt its water management policies and practices in order to include the nexus approach, find a connection with circular economy, and counter the consequences of climate change? And if I may add, how is this reflected in the China-Europe water cooperation? Mr. Ambassador, it's your floor, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much also for the compliment. Maybe one point when you said densely populated country, you can also rephrase it. It's a sparsely populated city-state with lots of green areas in between. I think 3 points are important. The first one is governance, the second one is governance, and the third one is governance. Maybe a short history lesson, because as you may know, because you will not find me in the written program, the Secretary General of the Netherlands Ministry of Infrastructure and Environment was supposed to come here but fell very sick yesterday. I'm a lawyer by profession. But what I do know from that time is that our water boards, who are now probably more than 800 years old, existed before our cities, our counties, and even our central government. So we didn't do that for nothing. We did that because of keeping our feet dry already back then. And with the population growth, we did a lot of land reclamation starting in the 17th century and still going on. And now for the more specific questions. What I mentioned about the past 800 years, the nature and the comprehensiveness of our water management has evolved and was adapted to changing circumstances and innovations. We could go on for a very long time. When you ask a Dutch to talk about water, I will definitely use more than the 3 minutes, but I will respect the 3 minutes margin, so I will not do that. Yes, we have a lot of challenges in our water management, and they are diverse. As I said, the amount of inhabitants, Holland has not, in spite of the land reclamation, has not become much bigger, but our population did become much bigger. We have now 17 million inhabitants on, which sounds, I know, in the perspective of China, that is small, but if I'm living now in Finland, and there are 5.5 million people living in an area 10 times the size of the Netherlands. So, and we have 17 million. So that is a challenge. More people using more water, keeping them free from seawater. Climate change, seawater will rise. Fresh water. We have, as you said, lots of industry, and we are the second largest agricultural exporter in the world. We do that in these green areas, but that gives a lot of waste and manure, wastewater that needs to be treated. So it is constantly on the move. Managing water is not a single issue in that sense. We must combine the demands and the opportunities of the food, water, energy nexus. And we must further integrate water and urbanization and ecology. I give you an example. 90 years ago, we laid a dike in a sea arm, basically to protect our people. What happened over the past 90 years is that this artificial lake, which is the biggest freshwater lake in Western Europe, and also very shallow, never more than 2-3 meters deep, has become a big basin for drinking water, but also for recreation and so on. This lake IJssel, the IJssel lake, because the IJssel River is one of them feeding it, has over the years become a freshwater basin, but it was not for granted and it was not easy when we started in 1932. In the 70s, water quality was extremely poor. It was, those who have been there have maybe seen it, a green soup of algae and still water. We have done a lot on purification, but then we realized that in spite of this, the water quality improved a lot, but in spite of this, what we hoped that there would be more migratory birds coming back, more species, did not happen. Then we realized that the very technical man-made constructions that we made, like this big 33-kilometer dike closing off a sea arm from the North Sea, did not in itself help bring biodiversity. And now over the past years we have done a lot in building with nature. That's to say, making from sand artificial islands, not to live there, but to make like small plots for seals and birds to shelter. So, and more challenges arise. As I also mentioned the climate change, which makes it very vital for our very classic task of making the sea dikes higher. But also, when you look at this IJsselmeer, shallow lake, there are effects of the climate change on the condition of this biggest freshwater lake in the Netherlands and in Western Europe. We don't know them yet. So, to come now back to your last point on why the cooperation with China in this EU setting. Well, let me first say we have an excellent bilateral cooperation on water with China already for 17 years, and our Minister for Infrastructure and Environment visited China, and last year's, and for example, we work very good between this IJssel lake where I talked about and the Lake Tai in China, which is a comparable. And so in the bilateral field we do a lot about lessons learned. But what is the advantage for a medium-sized country like the Netherlands to work in the EU framework with China? We see it as a top-on. We can there create more, with other European partners, we can create more economies of scale in establishing projects. For example, when we talk about the Rhine River, we can see it then broader and work with other European partners, Chinese businessmen, universities, water boards, government, central government. So it is a not either or, but it is an and. We think the bilateral cooperation can be given a new dimension through this European channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you very much for sharing with us the idea of the water management in the Netherlands. Indeed, Netherlands is one of the countries that the Chinese water engineers visit more than any other countries. I mean, one of them. And indeed, we are very impressed by the sea dike, the living with water, the concept, and also you just mentioned that the building with nature. So this is very inspirational to the rest of the world. And also, you mentioned about the bilateral cooperation between Chinese Ministry of Water Resources and the Netherlands Ministry of Infrastructure and Environment. And indeed, this is a very long-term relationship between the two sides, and which is very encouraging. And I thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And my best regards to Mr. Dronkers, who was supposed to come to present, to be the panelist of today. And the next question I would like to put to Mrs. Joanna Kopczyńska, the Deputy Director for Water Resources Department of the Ministry of Environment of Poland. Madam, Poland's challenge in coming years is to improve resource and energy efficiency, remarkably water efficiency. The overall shift towards a more resource-efficient economy will require long-term systematic innovation. Implementing the eco-innovation can also be seen as an economic opportunity rather than a cost. My question to you, ma'am, is, has Poland planned incentives to promote development and use of technologies that are needed for the paradigm change from the linear model towards a more circular water chain?
Thank you very much for your question. Before I answer your question, I'd like to apologize that Mr. Mariusz Gajda, who is the Deputy Minister responsible for water resources in Poland, could not come. And from the very last moment, he thought he will be able to come for the meeting. However, due to some other important arrangements in Poland, he could not be there present today. Thank you very much for the invitation. This year, Poland and China has signed the Memorandum of Cooperation. This happened during the summit of Belt and Road in Beijing this year, in the presence of the Polish Prime Minister, Mrs. Beata Szydło. So this year, we actually see as a very important year in the Polish and Chinese cooperation in the water sector. But as well, it's a very important year for Poland for this reason that we are now implementing the new water law. And this water law will change absolutely paradigm of the perceiving the water in Poland, in economy and in other aspects. And this has entered into force in August this year, and now at the moment we are arranging a new system, new instruments and new institutions. And now I'd like to come back to your question, which is, I think, a very good question as for Poland. And I will tell you a little bit more about our reform, because it has also a lot in common with the incentives for the circular economy in the water sector. So when it comes to Poland, indeed Poland is a country which faces the scarcity of water resources. Our available water resources per capita are much below the average of the European Union resources. Poland is not always perceived as a country with the problem of water. However, we do have a problem with water, of the distribution of the water in the country. And we also see the economic development of Poland will depend in the future, the same as was in Mr. Chenley's presentation, on the availability of the water in a good quality and quantity. Therefore, we see this process and as eco-innovation and closing this, making the water circulating in the system, not as a cost. We see it an opportunity and necessity, as it was said before by you. And we see the circular economy, of course, in much broader perspective than only the water sector, because as we are the member of the European Union, we see that in perspective of also the documents elaborated by the European Commission and the member states. Of course, we plan to have incentives for entrepreneurs offering eco-innovative environmental technologies. It's already happening since a few years. One of our this kind of incentives is a special program which is implemented from the national means in Poland. It's called Green Evo. It's the Green Technology Accelerator. This accelerator is helping the entrepreneurs in developing new sustainable, new technology, eco-technologies also, which will in the future take into account the circular economy. Of course, these are the technologies for the circular economy of the future. And now we have with this program, this initiative is run by the Ministry of Environment, and the Ministry is supporting the transfer of innovative homegrown technologies abroad, and we provide the opportunity for entrepreneurs to grow and sell their technology around the world. So this is not made only for domestic purposes, but also to, we see it it has an economic value, and it will enable our companies to grow and to have clients around the world. It's not easy to be a part of the Green Development program, because the company which would like to take part in this program has to be innovative, and there is a competition to gain a place in this program. However, now we have the 7th editions of the program, and it's been very successful. Our technologies are being sold around the world, and some of the technologies also refer to water and wastewater management. The other types of incentive that we give in Poland, a sort of incentive, is inside of the new water law. Before the introduction of the new water law, not every user was charged with the fees for water. And though in the economic calculations for any business done in Poland, not every business took into account the cost of water. Now it will change, because all the users will have to pay charges for water. Therefore, in the economic calculations, any enterprise which uses the water have to take into account. This will give an incentive to think about sparing the water, to make it circulating inside of the system, and to economize the use of water in a more larger scale. And we think in the future it will also be an incentive. It is maybe for some businessmen it could be seen as a sort of a little bit negative incentive. However, for the system it will work in the future for sure. We also support the European Union Environmental Technology Verification Program, and this program is foreseen to allow the paradigm shift from the take, wear and throw into a circular economy model where raw materials are maintained as possible long in circulation and waste generation is minimized. And just this week, during the 5th ACM Working Group Seminar in Seoul, Poland was also very much involved in the project on global recognition of environmental technology verification. Until today, the project, we have 8 countries declared to be a partner in this project. However, I think still there's a possibility to join this project, and the goal of this project is to build capacity for a global recognition of ETV results on the program, through the cooperation on ETV program on the new ISO standard, which was just published in September last year. And in 3 technology areas for which this norm was developed, there's a possibility to verify the technology for water purification and monitoring, monitoring of water quality for microbial and chemical contamination, and water treatment for drinking, removal of pollutants, treatment of wastewater from microbial and chemical contaminants. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say that Poland, both at the national and international level, supports the development of the eco-innovation sector and sees its deep link with the development of the sector and the need for support as necessary to facilitate and accelerate the transition to a circular economy model. So not only in positive incentive for the entrepreneurs, but also incentives inside of Polish law, a change of the paradigm, a deep change of the paradigm, and preparation for the future, for the challenges of the future connected with the water sector. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned the signing of the agreement between the Chinese Ministry of Water Resources and your ministry during the international forum, the Belt and Road Forum held in May, the past May in Beijing, and it was listed as one of the results of that high-level international forum. That's very encouraging for both of us. And also, I'm very interested to know that you Poland is now formulating a new water law, and which is very, very important. And maybe during the formulation of the laws, regulations, and there's large room for cooperation between countries. And maybe we could share some experiences of China in formulating our own water laws and regulations and policies. And I'm also impressed that the Poland's strategy, I mean the practices of the regarding the circular economy, that is very much in line with the European circular economy strategy. So thank you very much, Mrs. Kopczyńska. Now I would like to put the question to Mr. Péter Kovács. Mr. Kovács, you know, one of the biggest rivers, the Danube, runs across the whole territory of your country. But on the other hand, Hungary is still faced with you know, water scarcity, the vulnerability to climate change. I would like to ask you, what are the government plans to improve water security, both at supply and also at demand? And if I may, as a follow-up question, how do you foresee Hungary's contribution in the CEWP activities in terms of developing adaptation measures that the water sector has to develop and implement in the near future? Péter, please.
Thank you very much for the question. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I can agree that we are rich in water resources in the middle of the Carpathian Basin, in the middle of the Danubian region. But the distribution is very uneven by space and by time. Although we are a small country, we experiencing quite often, and more often, that in one end of the country we are irrigating, and the other end of the country we are fighting with floods. We are a typical downstream country. We have a longer dike system than Holland. It's a surprise, but it's true. We are depending very much on the neighbors as well. So for us, international cooperation is also a basic need. What we have done, we are taking water as a national security issue. I'm representing the Minister of Interior, and it's not likely in the other countries. Usually the Minister of Environment or Water is taking care of the water management. But in Hungary entirely, the Minister of Interior is responsible for the overall water management. We are taking climate change as a fact, not as a theory, because we're experiencing in the last few years the highest floods and also the ever lowest water levels in the water system. So it's a really big challenge. So we are doing a lot. We are doing a lot on national, on regional, and also on the global level. On national level, we also, like Poland, changed many of water-related legislation related with the water utilities. The ownership is entirely belong to the municipalities and the state. We are also looking for new possibilities to reuse wastewater, although it's not a key question, not like in Malta, for example, but it's also a resource. Phosphorus recovery and other things I also can mention from the wastewater, and the sludge utilization. It already was mentioned that biogas production, energy production from sludge, it's important. We think so. We also redefined some former methodologies due to the climate change. We just recalculated the highest flood levels, for example. Because if we are using the old statistical values, we are not really complying with the new challenges. And we also realize we cannot raise the dikes anymore. So we are using other non-structural measures to protect our people. And I think the modernization of the sewage treatment systems is also one key challenge, and also the supply of the people. We have a problem with arsenic. It's a natural origin, so it's not a man-made pollution, but it's a big challenge. We have to provide people according to the very high standards of the European Union drinking water. And I also like to mention on the regional level, we are doing a lot, especially in the frame of the transboundary commissions with our 7 neighbors. And also, it was also mentioned the Danube cooperation, the protection of the Danube River. Already in 2012, we already had a climate change adaptation plan for the ICPDR, for the Danube Commission. We are just updating this climate change adaptation strategies. It will be ready in the next year, and we will apply all the provisions of this plan in the national and the Danube Basin-wide River Basin Management Plan. I also like to mention the global activities, which is done from my government as well. We are chairing the Water Convention. This is a former UNEC convention. I said former because now, after the global opening, it is open for every UN nations. It's also laying a lot of provisions, how to share the water, how to cooperate. And one of the key activities also climate change adaptation in this framework. I can also recall we are participating in the high-level panel on water, or presidents taking part of it. And we also taking care of the SDG implementation. Budapest Water Summit already was organized 2 times, which was the main objective of the summit. SDG, to have, during the first summit, to have the separate SDG for water, and during the second summit last year, to have the implementation of the water-related SDGs. And finally, to answer to the second part of the question, what or how we can contribute with the China-Europe Water Platform, we also have a bilateral agreement with China. My colleague is a nominated person in the expert group who is responsible for the implementation of the MOU. I am his partner, so I think we will do a good progress. And what we can offer? We can offer our experience, or support, political and technical support as well. Or education. The water-related education is also very good in Hungary, as the water is a traditional kind of activity in the country. We are recently and continuously exchanging our experts, and we are also ready to share our knowledge on the technical fields, especially on flood forecasting, flood management, flood risk calculations, drought management, drought monitoring, and I can continue, but we will talk during the bilateral framework about the details. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Péter. Hungary, we are talking about the same language, I think, because when you talk about the water resources in the country, you say it's abundant water resources, but unevenly distributed, both from time or space. We're speaking the same language in China, the same problem. So my memory is still fresh that when we participated the Budapest summit, water summit, last year, I had the pleasure, I had the honor to accompany my minister to meet the president of Hungary in his palace, in his office, Mr. Adel. Yes. And we were impressed by his visions, you know, and leadership on the water development course. And indeed, he is one of the members of the high-level panel, composed of several heads of state. You know, it's a very, very high high-level panel on water. And also, you mentioned that the bilateral cooperation between China and Hungary, and indeed, my pleasure. You know, I have been appointed by my minister to serve as the chair of the bilateral commission, and you will be the chair from the Hungarian side. So I look forward to working with you, Péter, and in the years to come. So thank you. My next question is for Mr. Simon Buckle from OECD. Mr. Buckle, the generic mission of the OECD is to promote policies that will improve the economic and social well-being of the people around the world. OECD has in many connections emphasized that much has to be done to improve resource efficiency, definitely also for water. My question to you, Mr. Buckle, is what are your policy recommendations for governments to introduce new incentives and measures to improve the resource efficiency? And does OECD see differences between countries in need to prioritize these measures? And as a second question, if I may, China is not a member of the OECD. We know that, but OECD is now working very, very closely with China. And so how do you see China's challenges in improving the resource efficiency? Mr. Buckle, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And Ministers, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk. So some easy questions to get going with. An OECD outlook in 2012 forecast that demand for water would grow by at least 50% by the mid-century relative to the beginning of the century, and that 40% of our expanding population would live in water-stressed basins. That's a huge challenge that we face, so we need new approaches. The global scale of the risks we face from water insecurity, and by that I mean too much, too little, or too polluted water, at a conservative market-based estimate is at least $500 billion in 2010 figures, and in terms of the cost that you can't quantify, it has significantly more human ecosystem costs. So we need to do something, and there's increasing demand from the whole range of players, from governments, from cities, industry, communities, operators, NGOs, civil society, for new innovative approaches to water. And we can see a parallel, if you like, with what's happening in the electricity space. It's no longer possible to operate these infrastructures with the financial resources we have just by focusing on the supply side. We need to focus on both the supply side and the demand side in an integrated way, and we need to take into account the pluses and minuses of the impact of those operations on ecosystems. So we know that green-blue infrastructures can be a big help, but we're still seeing far too much damage to our ecosystems from the mismanagement of water flows from pollution. Too many rivers that don't even reach the sea these days. Too many lakes that are drying up. So we do face huge challenges. And one key policy there, of course, is water use efficiency, which is a driver for sustainable growth. It frees up water resource, it frees up public finance because you need to invest less in your water infrastructure, and it takes less energy for moving water around, for purifying water, and so on. And that money can be used for other purposes, for other development purposes. Putting targets for efficiency also triggers innovation. I was on the plane with an innovator from Sweden. He was coming to the business segment of this conference, and they'd reduced some critical treatment technologies in desalination by 90% over a few years. And that sort of innovation is going to potentially transform the way we approach things. Israel is a forerunner in this space. So I think there's tremendous potential. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to highlight two aspects of OECD work that might be of interest and useful in the context of the EU-China relationship. The first is summarized in this document. It's the OECD Council Recommendation on Water. This was adopted in 2016, the end of 2016, by all our 35 member countries, many of whom are represented here today. And the recommendation distills the analysis and policy recommendations from several decades of OECD work on water. And it covers the full range of issues dealing with water quantity, water quality issues, how you manage water risks and disasters, water governance, and ensuring finance and investment and pricing of those water services. Now, you also asked a question about China OECD, and it's true, we have a very good and close relationship, and we're very honored that the Minister actually was on a high-level panel a few years back where we worked with the World Water Council on financing infrastructure for a water-secure world. And actually I was very honored also to speak at this event 2 years ago in Copenhagen. It may be that the recommendation will provide some useful frameworks for discussing policy reforms and assess progress, whether it's within the EU or within China or in your mutual engagement with other countries. And so implementation of this recommendation is going to be supported by a more detailed toolkit of OECD policy analysis and recommendations, which we'll put on the web shortly. And we think that's one contribution that we could make to this partnership. And another is perhaps the round table on financing water, which grew out of that initiative that I just mentioned involving Minister Chen. This is something that we have established with the Netherlands government, with the World Water Council, and it's really a platform to facilitate an ongoing dialogue between the finance sector, which knows nothing about water, and the water sector, which seems to know not enough about finance because we're not getting the investments we need in the critical infrastructures. And this is a platform that has had 2 meetings already, one in April in Paris, and a second one we just had in Israel in September, focusing on innovation issues. And we were also very honored to have Chinese participation in the session we held at the Stockholm World Water Forum on the round table. And specifically, it seeks to diagnose the barriers and opportunities in securing finance for water infrastructure investments. It aims to deepen understanding of the priority and context dependence of addressing water security. You have to think about how the system works together in the context, not just isolated projects. And you need to build understanding of the necessary politics and enabling conditions needed effectively to address these challenges. And then, in conjunction with analytical work that we'll be taking forward within our own program, we hope to come up with more practical recommendations for actions in these areas. So I hope that gives you a flavor of what we're doing and some pointers perhaps for future engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barkle. China is not a member of the OECD, but indeed that China is actively engaged in the cooperation with the organization. And I believe that China is now sitting, although it is not a member of the organization, but China is sitting on the board of the Development Research Center, represented by the Chinese State Council's Development Research Center. And also, actually, as the Ministry of Water Resources, we are very interested in the global water governance program of the OECD. In fact, we have sent an intern, a young lady, to study work for a couple of months in Paris to get acquainted about the practices of the OECD. And there's a great room that China and OECD cooperate in the areas of water. In fact, you mentioned about the report. China has participated in the report, cooperated, with the World Water Council and OECD, and it was launched by Gabriele, the Secretary General in Daegu, in the Republic of Korea, during the 7th Water Forum, and that was indeed a great, outcome, for the cooperation between your organization and China. And as the CEWP, as a platform of water cooperation between China and Europe, we do need your help, your support to our activities. Thank you. So now I would like to come to the last but not least question to Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Altana. Mr. Ambassador, I'm very encouraged to know that Italy is interested and will be playing a greater role in the activities of the CEWP in the coming years. And I'm also very happy to learn that more EU member states will jump on the board. So could you please outline shortly what your plans for Italy's activities in the CEWP, within the CEWP?
Yes, Mr. Director General, thank you. As you can imagine, an ambassador is not supposed to be a water management expert. Actually, I'm here on behalf of our Minister of Environment, Mr. Gianluca Galletti, who could not make it and invited me cordially to represent him to express our plans after bringing his greetings to Commissioner Vella, to Minister Tiilikainen, to Minister Chenley, and to Minister Kiesler as the current chair of the Council. What are we going to do? After a few years of involvement in the activities of the China-Europe Water Platform, based also on our ongoing bilateral cooperation programs with the Popular Republic of China, we are now going to sign the declaration and to confirm our commitment and willingness as a member of the EU and nationally to environmental cooperation with China, with a view to exchange experiences and knowledge for the benefit of water security, and with a view to a sustainable way of dealing with water-related issues. What are we planning to do is to be enthusiastic and try to provide a new impetus through the activities of a new working group that is going to start its activities in the framework of the CEWP, proposed by us and dedicated to water management in a changing climate. We are honored to have the opportunity to co-lead this new working group, and we'll try to do our best to promote this theme and to mainstream its findings into the other platform activities. In a few words, the aim of the new group is tackling water resources management in both EU and China, drawing from experiences of the two sides, to develop, adapt, refine technologies, practices, strategies, and policies in order to counteract the negative effects of water availability due to climate change and to adapt to them. The specific concerns will be multiple use of water, wastewater reuse in irrigation and aquifer recharge, water saving and recycling in industry, and on top of that, preparedness to hydrological extremes like floods and droughts, which we are experimenting in Italy right now, for instance, and to do this while coping with aging infrastructures, another issue that we know unfortunately too well. The scientific agent on our side will be our National Research Center, and specifically the IRCA, our Water Research Institute, which has already a tradition of collaborations at the European and bilateral Italy-China scale. To sum it up, as I realize that not only I am the last hurdle to be clear before the signature, but even more enticingly before lunch, Italy doesn't think to be able to cope with climate change alone. We think that CEWP, China-Europe Water Platform activities are part of a global solution, and we want to commit actively in this global solution. As a side remark, our Minister of Environment and the United Nations Economic Economic Commission for Europe are organizing a conference in Rome, the 23rd to the 25th of October, dedicated to water and climate, the great rivers of the world in comparison. We think that Europe and China have historically experiences to share about the management of great rivers. So on behalf of our Minister of Environment, please feel free to join and to bring your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to the international conference on Great Rivers. And indeed, Mr. Ambassador, as you rightly pointed out, that no country can deal with the climate change problems alone. So we are very happy to know that Italy is going to co-lead the program for water resources in the changing climate, and this is very encouraging. And this is we really much look forward to cooperating, to your involvement, more involvement in the CEWP activities. And back to the circular economy. Permanent Secretary Stuttgart, I couldn't agree more with you that water is the shared, resource in all production activities, but the wastewater is the largest untapped resource in all categories. This is true. So this has to be changed. If not, the water will become, I believe that will become more polluted as it travels through, the entire system, making the future use, very hard or even impossible. So this traditional way of water management, or rather the linear model, is unsustainable, and both economically and environmentally. According to our panelists, the better approach is to circulate water in closed loops. And in this model, water can be used and reused again and again, and retaining the full value of this precious resource. And also, according to our panelists, in the future, we not only need to circulate water to a much larger extent, but also to recover a wide variety of substances from water, reducing both waste and costs. In conclusion, water in the green economy focuses on the socio-economic opportunities that proper water management provides to social and economic development, while also safeguarding freshwater ecosystem. In green economies, the role of water is both maintaining biodiversity and ecosystem services, and in providing water. This role is recognized, valued, and paid for. So with that, I would like to conclude the second part of our panel discussion. And please join me in thanking our panelists with a big round of applause. Thank you.